Hello and welcome to the Live the Path podcast. I'm Dr. Faramarz Hidaji. We come to you today from Mill Gap Farms, a maple syrup farm near Monterey, Virginia. I'm here with my lovely wife,
Jill.
And I wanted to relate in this podcast an experience we had yesterday. We visited, just out of curiosity, a Mennonite church, and it turns out it was Mother's Day. It was kind of a special event for them because they had prepared this huge feast. The service was wonderful. And then we went to the brunch, which was actually the part we're going to talk about today. So, because it was a Mother's Day brunch, the men had prepared the meal, and they were serving, and the women got to take a break this time. And we had been camping for a couple of days, so having a nice hot meal was pretty attractive to me, too. I was looking forward to it all the way through the church service, I have to admit. And so we sat down in this gigantic hall. They had a buffet table that did the prayer, and everybody went and got their food, and it was all just delicious food, most of which I think was actually sourced from the people at the church. You know, they grow their own food, they have their own cattle, raise their own wheat, and I mean it was so that aspect of it I was very excited about, because I think the more local the better. And we sat down and we started eating, and about halfway through the meal, and these were just beautiful, loving people. There were kids running around just to set the scene, little kids running around getting their food. There were grandmas, there were multiple generations, there were young couples, all part of this Mennonite community in McDowell, Virginia. Right? Mm-hmm. And I just was eating this delicious food, and I looked up and I noticed, nobody's got their phones out. And of course, they don't use telephones, a lot of them. And certainly that smartphones are not encouraged in church, but nobody was on their telephone. People were enjoying each other's company. They were looking at each other. They were engaging, and they were engaging with us. We were visitors, and they warmly welcomed us to sit at the table with them and enjoy this amazing meal, to commune with them, and asking us questions about who we were, what we were doing there. And in return, I'm the guy across from me I met had a small-scale dairy farm. We really enjoyed talking to him and learning about his operation and what had led him to that point. He was a second or third generation dairy farmer, was living on his dad's farm and trying to make ends meet. The guy next to him was a maple syrup farmer who used to be Amish, young guy, and had moved to this area, had shifted to become a Mennonite, and for various reasons, and his job was farming maple syrup, and I got to asking him about what he did for a living. Anyway, it was a deeply engaging, empowering, renewing, encouraging afternoon. We spent about 3 hours there, and I left there with this sense of peace I really hadn't felt since we spent a week on Thich Nhat Hanh's monastery 12 years ago, something like that. Mm-hmm. And so I got to thinking, what is the secret sauce? And one easy takeaway is put down your phone. I mean, if you put your phone down and re-engage with the present moment, I think without that, then a lot of these other things are not possible. But beyond that, it felt like a throwback to what I would imagine America in the 1950s would be, where there was a sense of community. This was a small town where people obviously all knew each other, and that can be good and it can be bad. But I think one of the things I've noticed as I've lived here in America for the past 40 years or so is us becoming progressively more segmented and isolated and kind of withdrawn. And Jill and I both have lived in neighborhoods where you almost could reach out with a 10-foot pole and touch the next house, but we've not talked to our neighbors, And you get the sense that here, even though most people have land and they're far apart, that it's a community, mm-hmm. and it's a big family. Not that that's all good, but a lot of it is good. What else, Jill? What was your takeaway?
My takeaway was that watching the parents and the children interact with each other, these in large part seem to be farm families, and their children work with them on the farm, and so they actually work together. They're in commune together as a family and doing things together, and you could see that relationship, like they knew each other. It wasn't like parents and children. There was this interaction of all the generations, and there was an ease with it. But having seen the family here at Mill Gap, we worked with the kids yesterday and bottle fed the lambs, and seeing that in action, you see how they know each other.
Yeah. That's actually, thanks for bringing that up. And how yesterday we got up. We're camping on this maple syrup farm, the Mill Gap farm, and enjoying watching this family go through their daily routine. They literally they homeschool. They live on this farm, and they have duties from 6 a.m. to dark. And seeing these small children, I mean, how old is Gabe, would you say? 8?
I think, yeah.
7, 8, something like that. He's driving his dad's ATV in the morning, and his older sister is helping bottle feed the baby, the lambs. And I think, as a conventional teenager might see that as kind of a hassle, like, oh, I'd rather be, on my computer or whatever. But imagine the sense of worth it gives a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old boy to say, take this $40,000 ATV, drive it down to where the calves are, make sure they have water, move the gate so the cattle can get up. And even though it's probably not pleasant for Gabe to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and do that stuff, he has this subliminal, this subconscious sense of worth, like he can do things. Agency is the word I'm looking for. He can act on his environment. He's getting that from very early on. Versus, in the average city, a kid might not feel like they have any purpose. When they're that age, they're not actually producing. They're not helping the family in any way.
Yeah, we were walking down to the barn, and Gabriel noticed a lamb laying on its side without a mom around, and went and checked on it to make sure it was okay. And then we later let his mom know that the mom may have walked off that one. Particularly, they may have to bottle feed it. But I mean, a little 8-year-old taking responsibility for the flock and the herd was really fun to see, and him sharing some of his stories with us.
Yeah, and you might think, well, that's going to just beat the joy out of a child, but it was actually the absolute opposite. These kids were running around barefoot and jumping on, climbing on hay bales. And,
oh no, they weren't barefoot because they have electric fences. They were rubber booted.
Well, yeah. No, his sister was running around. But I'm just saying, like, you would think when you talk about giving a kid a bunch of duties, milking cows and stuff, that's going to make them kind of downtrodden and beat down and serious.
They love to share with us what they knew.
They're the most joyful, engaged, happy kids I think I've been around a long time. And they were kids. I mean, they got to be kids all day long. Yeah. So pretty cool. Now, one last point before we move on. So I was trying to figure out how I would encapsulate this past few days, because it's been, number one, we got here to this farm and there's no cell service, so we were forcibly separated from the internet and our cell phones. Yeah. We had no other option. So we did that for 2 or 3 days, and then we had a church experience, and then last night we got to bottle feed baby lambs, and I've never held a baby lamb, and oh my God! And simultaneously they were trying to talk us into taking a couple of them home, and yeah, okay. So I was like, how am I going to bring all these? Oh, and we visited Joel Salatin's farm also
a couple of days ago.
Right.
Yeah, Polyface.
So the regenerative farm that Joel Salatin has where is his farm? It's close to here. It's in Virginia somewhere.
It's near Stanton. It's actually
near
not
Stanton.
It's Swoop, I think, Virginia.
Near Stanton, which actually is spelled Staunton, but for some reason we say Stanton. But okay, I'll
convince you to say
I'm
it
going to do it like the locals. But so that this has been like 3 or 4 days of recharging our batteries and re-engaging with the present moment, and kind of going primitive and seeing what that feels like, and it's been fantastic. I mean, and we live in the woods, so I mean, but we have internet, and now we have fiber optic. But so I was thinking, well, how am I going to summarize all this morning before we kind of head back home? And I picked up this book, Beyond Labels. It's by Joel Salatin and Sina McCullough, who is a PhD nutritionist, thinking I'm going to get more information in my head about how to read labels and how to eat healthy and how to, be the conspicuous consumer and all that. Turns out it's more kind of a how do you live life book. But this is how all these things kind of fall in our lap and roll together. So this morning's reading, as I was opening this up, it said this. It said, the reason a food pyramid would never have been possible 100 years ago is because sterile packages out of context didn't exist. Right? And I understand that. That's 100% true, because I grew up in a country, Iran, when I was a kid, where we didn't have styrofoam and saran wrap. And we would go on Saturdays. My dad would take me to the market. It wasn't called a farmer's market because it was just the market, because they're all farmers markets. And you would buy from the producer. You would buy meat from the butcher. You would buy bread from the baker that was baking it on site. You would buy vegetables from the guy who had carried his stuff to the market that day from his farm. And so this idea that the food pyramid is a result of our detachment. It's an emblem of our detachment from the source of food. That's a critical statement. So Joel goes on to say, everyone churned butter or bought butter from someone who did. So either you produced the food or you knew who had produced the food. And that's very different from the way things are now. So he goes on to say here, the next thing that grabbed me was, the problem with profound ignorance is that it makes us infinitely more gullible to lies and deception. So, and that statement to me summarizes the core problem, which is that we're so detached from our food, we have no idea how it's produced in most cases. And that leaves us very gullible to believing whatever people tell us, and that people telling us things, the FDA and the government and food producers, and what's healthy and what's not. Time after time, that's turned out not to be real.
Right.
Saturated fat's going to kill you. You need to eat pasta all the time. Just all these lies that we hear. And then when that lie gets uncovered, they just kind of move on to the next thing. The whole superfoods thing, I bought that hook, line, and sinker in the 2000s, that whole, you got to eat blueberries and kale all day long, and superfood smoothies, and all those things. Just not true. I mean, the reason that we eat blueberries all the time is because one study came out in one of the Ivy League schools, Harvard maybe, that said blueberries are good for your brain. It was a very flawed study, but the result of that study was that blueberry consumption in America went up like 20 or 30 times. So that's what this is about. It's about directing the consumer. Then Sina says, Dr. McCullough, we believe certain foods are healthy and other foods like fat will make us sick and eventually kill us. We adopted those beliefs largely from the government. And as you mentioned, we are susceptible to believing their truth because we are so far removed from our food supply. So people that, because we're so detached, which is the point Joel Salatin was making, and we don't know anything, that leaves this huge vacuum for people to come and fill in with misinformation, with not that I don't like to use that word, but in this case I think it definitely applies. Sina says, what if their truth is wrong? So we've been eating the way the FDA has been telling us to eat, this food pyramid thing, since the 60s. But in 1965, heart disease was rare. It was not the biggest killer. I think it was lung cancer because of smoking, coincidentally. The other thing that was rare in the 60s was obesity. The obesity rate in this country was like 5%. We are on track in the next 5 to 7 years to a 50% obesity rate, which that is our lovely host, the host family.
Emily needs her cow to come down to milk her.
So this is what they do, and it's fantastic. They call the cows down to get milked every day. We may have to go down there and do some milking. Well, that may be a good place to wrap up. And so there's one last part of this discussion, which is you're hearing all these things. Obviously, most of us are not going to move out to a Mennonite community and live on 160 acres of maple farm. But what can you do? And I'll turn the table over to Jill here so she can. What would you suggest, Jill? Somebody who's in a city maybe doesn't have.
I'd say start where you are, and it's in the book that Joel Salatin wrote that You Can Farm, but he talks about just start where you're at, even if it's a windowsill with a plant. And I know I've watched my mom go from gardening large scale when we were all growing up in her house to paring it down, and now she does pretty much container garden because that in her late 80s is what she feels she wants to do. And I think you can go from that a windowsill garden and to go from there. I think you start where you're at. You don't need a 100-acre farm to start getting more in touch with your food. Find out who the local growers in your area are, and buy local if you can. Even if it's not pristine organic, at least it's close to source and you're getting it pretty fresh off the farm.
Yeah, first step is waking up too. Like, even if I agree that even having a little garden patch, everybody can have that. You can have a little raised bed or even a few pots with herbs in them. Just get the idea that food is not something that is born in a styrofoam container. But even if, let's say, you don't have any interest in gardening, you're living in a studio apartment in the center of Manhattan, the one thing you can affect, you have control over, as Viktor Frankl said in his book Man's Search for Meaning, is you do have control over your attitude, over your perspective. And even just like giving yourself a break from electronics for a few days and retaking your focus and your attention back from all the forces that are trying to take it away from you is a very powerful thing. Because if you are in a zombie state because you're locked into your smartphone 4 to 6 hours a day, it's hard to be healthy in other aspects of your life. So I would say that my half of this, and Jill's half, is always regenerative farming and livestock, and she that stuff's just in her blood because of the way she grew up, and I see this as like this taking back of your attention from the forces that are trying to redirect it for their own benefit. So taking that attention back and limiting your smartphone use, taking maybe smartphone holidays or detoxes, Andrew Laubacher calls it. I think that's works hand in hand with these efforts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to continue this adventure. We have a few more days left in our adventure with our beautiful Airstream as we continue our traipse across Virginia, learning about how people do things this part of the woods. And I would ask you, if anything you've heard today has been informative or inspiring to you in any way, you can click the share button or the like button below us and join this community, and hopefully this will be something that continues to snowball and get more powerful and wake people up as we go along. Thank you for joining us.